It's not hard to pick Arkansas's best win of the 2023 season. It's either Florida last weekend or it's Western Carolina or Kent State, and I think we all know which way we would go. Arkansas beating Florida 39-36 in overtime in the Swamp. It's a game, Scottie, you and I talked about last week that we didn't think it was an impossible task for Arkansas to win that game for various reasons. I think the thing that surprised me the most was not the win. It was how good Arkansas's offense looked in its first week under a new offensive coordinator, given everything that had gone on. I mean, this looked closer to the version of Arkansas's offense that we've been used to seeing under Sam Pittman, and I think that's an encouraging sign, as we go on for the rest of the year.
I mean, there was a mountain of evidence against Arkansas for us to pick them, right? Like they were going into, even though they'd been competitive in some pretty tough environments in previous weeks, like what Arkansas did the week or 2 weeks, I guess I should say, leading up to the Florida game was a total mystery because it was the bye week, and then the next week we typically have practice availabilities, but we didn't go Monday and Tuesday, and they're sticking with that. I think they're kind of taking a if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of approach to this, letting Kenny Guyton, I think, get more comfortable. But yeah, the offense looked good, and I think we may have undersold the importance of having Rocket healthy in terms of looking at KJ's total production, because KJ went over 90. I mean, he was great running the football the other day. I think he had 5 explosive runs, according to Stat Broadcast. Sometimes we've gone weeks without seeing multiple in a game, and Rocket goes over 100 yards. KJ was, pretty effective through the air at times, especially throwing the ball downfield to guys like Ty Washington, who's not going to be with them probably the rest of the season. And Andrew Armstrong was a big play guy. The offense looked pretty good. Like especially that first drive, it was like, oh my goodness, who are these guys? It kind of came back to reality a little bit, but I think KJ, I wrote this the other day, KJ came up big when they needed it most. Like he picked up some big-time yards for them when they needed it, converted some big third downs, and threw a beautiful game winner to Tyrone Broden, who didn't drop it, so that's always good.
I thought the offense wore Florida down, like toward the end of the game. I looked at this, between Rocket and KJ, 7 of their final 10 carries went for at least 11 yards. KJ had the big 20-yarder in overtime where it looked like, oh boy, they're in trouble, 1st and 20.
Literally made a man bounce off of him.
Yeah, I mean, he just totally ran over a Florida defense. He looked and I think some of it has to do, you mentioned Rocket being healthy. I think the two of them play off of each other really well.
Yeah.
And I think that we just haven't seen that this year. Even, from what I heard about Sanders is that even before the Western Carolina game, he was dealing with a little bit of this knee injury that has hampered him all season. And so we didn't even see it that day down in Little Rock. We haven't seen it all year, those two being able to work off of each other in the RPO game. We saw a couple of great reads by KJ where he, looked like he was about to hand off, and he tucks it and, gets him 6-7 yards in a critical, say, like 2nd and 5, and they get an 8-yard gain, and now all of a sudden it's 1st and goal. They play off of each other really well, and if Sanders can stay healthy and KJ can stay healthy, then that's an element to this offense that we just haven't seen this year, and it's what we thought we were going to see all year.
Yeah, there was I wrote this the other day. KJ was responsible, obviously, for 5 pass plays of 15-plus yards and 5 run plays of 10-plus yards. Arkansas had 9 run plays of 10-plus yards. KJ had 5, Rocket had 4.
Yeah.
So I think those dudes are pretty valuable. I would agree. I think they do feed off of each other. And to me, it seemed like Rocket almost looked kind of brand new. Not saying that he had like the breakaway speed that you might like him to have, but I think like the second effort stuff and the third effort stuff, I think that was there. He was able to maybe pick up a couple of tough yards maybe after contact where he maybe wasn't able to the first couple of weeks.
I don't think he's going to look like Rocket of 2022 this year.
So either,
I think with everything he's been through, with the knee, it being late in the year, I don't know that he's 100% yet. I think he's 100% as if, in so much as he's not going to hurt himself by playing, but I don't think you're going to see him cutting and running and hitting his stride quite like he did last year. Ethan?
Yeah, and one thing I just thought was important on Saturday was that, it's like every single halftime this year you hear Sam say, like, we've got to run the ball better. It's like it's almost just like routine at this point that Sam's going to say.
He's telling you what he's about to tell his team.
Yeah. Well, and it's just funny because it's like early in the year, it's like we got to run the ball better, but they're getting 1 yard gains in the run game. It's or negative gains. It was on Saturday. It felt like even in the first half, I think Rocket broke one for like 17 or something in the first half, but like even that run aside, it's like they were getting like 3 or 4 yard runs where it's like, eventually you'll wear them down. And that's kind of just what happened. It looked back like how, the run game looked with Kendall Briles, to be honest, with all that run pass option and with them just kind of wearing a team down eventually. And I think, like you said, just down the stretch, it felt like if Arkansas ran the ball, they're at least going to stay ahead of the chains if they're not moving the chains. That was really important. I thought that last drive in overtime, of course, you'd get the penalty that backs you up. And you're kind of like, oh, is this where Arkansas just finally, like, it's that moment that you're kind of waiting
like the here we go again.
Yeah, the here we go again moment of, oh, penalties going to screw you out of maybe a big win on the road. And then KJ takes off and trucks a dude. I think it's funny, early in the year, AJ Green said, I don't know if he can say I lift weights. It's more of a balance thing. But it was one of his I lift weights moments for sure, running over that guy. And then Rocket on the next play or the one after had a really impressive run, caught himself. And yeah, it just seemed like if those two are clicking in the run pass option, it just opens up a lot more. They moved the pocket finally where KJ was, a little more comfortable throwing the ball too. It was overall, I mean, you had your best yardage output since the Liberty Bowl. So you can't say that, the Kenny Guyton effect wasn't real at all. And it's not like Florida's defense has been bad at all this year. They were down some guys on Saturday, but all in all, they've been a pretty good defensive team for most of the year.
A lot more tempo, a lot more RPO, a lot more stretch plays than we've seen at any point. It's clear to me that Kenny Guyton is very heavily influenced by Kendall Briles, and that shouldn't be surprising given how long they've worked together.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, it looked like what we thought the offense was going to look like all along. Mm-hmm. And maybe they're definitely a lot like a couple of years past. You look at KJ's passing numbers just on the surface, 20 of 31, and not really his most efficient passing day that we've seen. But I'm looking here, he completed 6 of his last 7 passes in the game, and I think 7 of 9 total to finish it. Yeah, I just thought he was clutch when you needed him to be. And then the number that really jumped out to me the other day was just the 347 yards of total offense. Mm-hmm. I mean, he went into that game averaging 218.4, and the 347 yards are the most for KJ in a conference game since they lost narrowly at Alabama in 2021. Like, it was one of those kinds of games for KJ. Obviously, having an overtime period helped him in that regard, but I mean, they were going to need KJ to be kind of Superman again to kind of get over that hump and out of the. I don't know if you can get over a hump and out of a rut at the same time, but it took a kind of a Superman effort from KJ to do it.
I was impressed by both teams and their responses in the fourth quarter because it was like you keep waiting. Okay, somebody has thrown the punch that is going to knock the other one out. And it never, that never ended up happening. I mean, even after Cam Little kicks his field goal to tie the game with 44 seconds left, Florida goes right back down the field. I think it was a little bit alarming for Arkansas's defense, honestly, how well or how easily Florida was able to move the ball in the fourth quarter. Something that I think gets overlooked because they were able to
it went 72 yards in a minute and 17 seconds. It's crazy.
But it was just, I mean, one of the things that I thought was really impressive was just how both teams responded. And, Ethan, and you're talking earlier that it felt a lot like the Arkansas-LSU game in that both teams just kept responding to each other. I mean, like at LSU, the only thing that stopped Arkansas was the clock. If they get the ball back, they're probably going to go down and score again there. In this Florida game, I mean, fourth quarter was just back and forth. And really the only time that nobody scored was when Florida didn't kick the field goal at the end of regulation, or they kicked the field goal, but they didn't make it. And I would say, too, that Florida did not do their kicker any favors. Number one, by putting it on the left hash mark. And I know you're in the run of play and you're not really thinking about that. But I think that has to be something that you think about, where you're putting the ball down for a kicker. I've never been a kicker, But it seems to me, in watching a lot of football, that for right-footed kickers, the toughest kick is left hash mark, pushing it right. It seems like that happens a lot. Something about trying to make that angle causes you to push the ball right, and that's what they did there. But anyway, the combination of not really placing it where their kicker could have success, and then having that false start penalty, or the what was it, illegal substitution penalty.
Yeah.
The combination of those two things really hurt him. But all of that is to say, fourth quarter and overtime, even to a certain extent, just the ability to match what the other team was doing, I thought was really impressive.
Yeah, and I feel like that's what was missing at LSU, honestly, was Arkansas catching any sort of break like that.
Yeah.
It was just LSU was going to march down, and Jaden Daniels is going to lead them on a quick drive, and it's going to be, okay, Arkansas, you got to go back out and piece together a long drive to match it. It was like against Florida, it was kind of, you still felt the defense was bend but don't break. I mean, there towards the end of the second half, it got a little dicey as far as they were just kind of moving the ball with ease, but that missed field goal was kind of the break that I think they needed to let them know, like they're still in the game. You haven't like totally messed up the game for the team. And then in overtime, to limit them to a field goal was really big. I mean, I just think that whole, sometimes you got to get lucky in that whole situation there with all the substitution and then missing the field goal. And this was a good field goal kicker too, Trey Smack. I think it was his second.
What a great
miss.
name for a field goal kicker, by the way.
And I think it was his second miss of the season. So Arkansas got lucky there, and sometimes you got to get lucky, especially on the road. So,
Yeah, you definitely do. I think Arkansas's defense in overtime it was basically a 3-and-out possession.
Mm-hmm.
And looking at the
I think
drive,
they got 2 PBUs in overtime.
the drive history here before that missed field goal at the end of regulation, they'd given up touchdown, field goal, touchdown. So your game could be in the balance if you give up a touchdown, to begin overtime. But I think Trajan Jeffcoat made a play early in overtime. He hurried Graham Mertz and then Jaden Johnson, and Snacks Johnson teamed up, and then Jaden Johnson broke up a pass. I mean, good on Jaden Johnson making a couple of plays. I mean, we've heard all season, less obviously during the losing streak, that Jaden Johnson's kind of a different player than he was last year. I think you're starting to see that with like the receptions allowed on targets in the passing game. I think you're seeing that. I don't think he gave up a reception at Alabama on 5 targets, which is pretty good. And he goes out and makes a couple big plays for you with Snacks Johnson. What was he? Co-defensive player of the
SEC co-defensive player of the week.
Of the week, yeah.
that was 3 co's.
That was a little
We
bit.
got 4 players of the week total.
The Snacks Johnson nod was. I mean, granted, he had a nice game. I think he had a couple
Jalen
tackles
Braxton,
for loss.
I think, over Snacks Johnson because of the impact of that first touchdown.
Yeah, and then Dwight McLaughlin he came off the bench and broke up 3 passes. Pretty good. I mean, he made some nice tackles in the run game, and then I think he kind of snuffed out a quick pass to the sideline. I mean, you texted me earlier today, like,
okay, so I was gonna come back to this.
So good, man.
I was gonna come back to this here in a little bit, but since you mentioned, we'll just go through it right now. The All-America ballots were due this week. The way it works for the Football Writers Association, you get 2 ballots. You get an early ballot, and you kind of put the players who are on your radar, and then based on all of those votes, you get a smaller ballot later in the year that has the top vote getters from that early ballot. And I was looking through the Pro Football Focus numbers to help me with some of the positions, that I'm just not paying enough attention to, like offensive guard, and center,
right,
and things of that nature, to be perfectly honest with you. But I was looking at cornerbacks, and I was really stunned to see Dwight McLaughlin with the number 1 total defense grade of all cornerbacks nationally. I was stunned.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that I don't think he's that level of player. I just don't know that I realized he was having that level of a season.
He's given up eight receptions all year. And I asked Sam about it. I asked him an initial question about Nudie yesterday or on Monday, and then asked a follow-up, like, I've probably done it a lot in the past, like, why is he good in coverage? And it's like a combination of his savvy, like he's really smart. I think he's confident enough to think that he could cover CeeDee Lamb on an island. Like I think he probably believes that. Like Sam said a few weeks ago that he thinks Snacks thinks that he could go in and play nose guard because he's got that dog in him. But Nudie, he hasn't given up 100 yards in pass coverage this year, which is incredible. Which makes me think, like, he's got to start this weekend, right? Like, you've got to completely, potentially take away anything that Auburn could throw at you.
And he's faced some good receivers.
Game. Yeah, faced some really good receivers.
I think he was matched up against Malik Neighbors, right?
Yeah, and I'm sure he had some matchups with Brian Thomas too.
He had a pick that game, right?
He did have a pick
with
in that
Burton
game.
at Alabama. Yeah. He was matched up with him. I mean, these are some of the Neighbors. I was looking this morning, just throwing out names of who I might put on my Heisman ballot, because I have an idea of who I'm going to go 1, 2, 3 right now. I think is really wide open. And Neighbors was a name that I came up with because he's just had such a big year for them, receiving wise. And he didn't have a huge game against Arkansas. I mean, he had a decent game, but you compare that to some of the other games that he had.
They picked on Jaheim Singletary in that game.
Yeah,
they really did. But just one last thing on Nudie, and I'll shut up and let Ethan talk. Nudie has been targeted in the passing game fewer times this year than Jaheim Thomas. That's respect right there. I just think there's obviously like a 50-50 chance that you complete a pass when you target him, but with it being Nudie and like the ball skills that he has, I think that percentage drops from 50.
I was surprised to see against Florida, he had more pass breakups than any Arkansas defensive back since Cam Curl in 2017. That caught my eye.
Yeah, and the thing about Dwight McGlothern too is he's dealt with that turf toe this year too. So it's like he's he's doing this all while like trying to get out there as much as he can. Probably still a little like you don't really recover during the season too much from an injury. You play through it most of the time, and he's doing this probably a little bit sore still down there.
And he got concussed at Ole Miss too.
Yep.
And this guy is just
allegedly.
He's kind of we talk a lot about Caleb Battle on the basketball team just being like that swagger, the guy who gets – whenever Dwight McGlothern makes a good play, the whole defense is having a good time because he makes sure that they celebrate it. It's just he's kind of that player that he knows he's good, and he makes sure that he knows he's good.
Yeah. There's nothing I enjoy more than a Dwight McGlothern interception celebration. It gets the people going, as they say.
He had one of those pass breakups on Saturday. He had it was in a big situation. I think it might have been a third down to get him off the field, and he was really excited after that one, I remember.
More to get to here in just a moment. We'll tell you first, the Whole Hog Football Podcast is sponsored by Kendall King Design, Displays, Signage, KendallKing.com. That's KendallKing.com.
The Kendall King Group family of companies plays to win, just like our hogs. We know how demanding retail marketing is today. From digital omni-channel creative services through in-store signing and displays, and finally to social influence, we've got you covered. Our KKG Inc. family of companies, Kendall King, Shopcart Creative, and Soapbox Influence are winning with multiple retailers and brands. We play to win and will be a winning partner for all your retail marketing service needs. Go Hogs!
After Arkansas beat Florida, I came back to a couple of things that we had written and or said or both earlier this year. The first one was that, and I thought about this, that sometimes you just have to be patient for some of these thoughts to come to fruition. But remember when they played LSU so well in Death Valley? We said that's going to pay off for them somewhere, and they're going to win a road game this year if they play like that on the road again. And they played like that on the road every game. I mean, they were right there with Alabama. They were right there with LSU, right there with Ole Miss. And then finally they break through and they beat Florida. But that was thought number one, that this is going to, playing that well on the road is going to pay off for you somewhere in a tough environment. They played in some really tough environments this year. And then the other one was, I think I wrote this after the Alabama game, that sometimes when you're losing these games by 3 points and 7 points and 4 points and 3 points again, and I mean, you guys know what it's been like, that you can just lose your team. And, all of a sudden that 7-3 loss becomes 21-3 pretty fast. And that just has never happened with Arkansas this year. And you always felt like that was going to pay off at some point, that, being so close so many times while it is frustrating in the moment, that's going to pay off for you at the end. And, we said this a couple of weeks ago, we think it's an easier stretch down at the end. Not to say that all these games are winnable. They may lose to Auburn this week. I think they're going to have a tough time beating Missouri at the end of the year. But all these things that kind of we have felt over the past 4 or 5 weeks, I felt like maybe they were a little bit validated by them going into Gainesville and winning the way they did.
Yeah, and that Mississippi State game was kind of the one that, I mean, it was another close loss, but it felt like the one that's you're like, okay, is this going to be the one that just breaks them? Because that's not a good Mississippi State team they lost to. They should want that game back so badly because I think they should beat them.
Mississippi State ought to go 0-8 in SEC this year.
Not a good team.
They're not going to, but they should.
Yeah, that defense is not very good, and it's just incredible.
The offense is horrible too.
Yeah, not a very good team. But it's that type of game that I was at least thinking. I'm like, okay, all these one possession losses, like they were kind of encouraging. I mean, they're encouraging, but they're never like satisfying. I'm sure for the team to just keep on losing those close games, but to be as close as you were at Alabama, as close as you were at LSU, you just felt like they were going to break through. I thought the Mississippi State game was the game that's like, okay, they aren't going to break through. This is going to be a terrible stretch to end the year. But I think that change, honestly, of getting Kenny Guyton to be the interim offensive coordinator and firing Dan Enos, I think that might have been the breath that needed to be in the locker room. They clearly like him. They wanted to play hard for him. And I don't know, it's kind of is that type of game that I'm not going to buy that they're going to win out the rest of the year and go 3-0. I just don't think that they're better than Missouri, just to be honest. But I could see it, though. I wouldn't have said that after the Mississippi State game, that I could see them winning out. I think that Florida game, just the way it played out, the way that they kept punching back, and the way they finally did break through, it could pay dividends down this last stretch as well.
Well, I wrote after they played Alabama that I said it wouldn't be surprising if they went into the Missouri game 5-6. Now, I wrote that thinking that they would beat Mississippi State and they might lose to Florida in the Swamp.
That
I mean, all that's happened is that those two outcomes have reversed. And, they're right where I think we thought they might be after the Alabama game.
For sure. I thought the Mississippi State game, especially on the offensive side of the ball, might be like the breaking point. But the bye week came at just like when you're having offensive issues to the extent that Arkansas was, the bye week was the absolute best thing that could have happened for them. And you got some guys healthy. So that's two nice big breaths of fresh air that you got. Mm-hmm. And I feel like they came out energized. Like there's obviously still a lot of things, and Sam was like, we had X number of plays on offense that we want to hold some kids accountable for X number of plays on defense and special teams. So there's a lot of things obviously to clean up, but if you can score 39 points on the road in the Swamp, granted it's not a great Florida defense or a team in general, but still Tennessee went in there and lost.
Yeah.
Arkansas went in there and won, and in game one under a interim offensive coordinator, I think the kids, it's obvious, especially when you started seeing post-game videos of like that raw emotion coming from those offensive players and their genuine love for Kenny Guyton and what he's doing. I think they're bought in for sure. I don't know how they're going to finish down the stretch. If I had to guess, they'd probably finish 2-1 and just shy of a bowl bid because Missouri's really good. They proved that again last week by playing Georgia really tough on the road. But I think defense, here I go again, give you a chance to win. And the offense I think it can give you a chance to win now because it maybe feels a little bit revitalized.
It's crazy that if they do win out, that they would match last year's record. It just feels like this has been so much worse of a season than last year. But, I mean, they still have a chance to finish just how they were last year if they were to win out and win a bowl game.
It's all about November. I mean, last year they were not good in November. They beat Ole Miss. That game was kind of weird because they got up by so much, and then all of a sudden they kind of had to hold their breath at the end, right? But they lost to Liberty, and they lost to LSU, and they lost to Missouri, all these close games. I mean, it's all about how you finish the season, how people remember your season. I think if they can go on a run here, even if they go 5-7 and say they lose to Missouri in a competitive game, I think people would be. I think a lot of people would be okay with the trajectory of how things are going. I think you have to take the whole season into consideration, the totality of everything, but it's all about how you finish. I mean, that's how it's always been. That's why the bowl games have always been such a big deal. It doesn't mean if you go 7-5 and you win a bowl game, it's a whole heck of a lot different feeling than if you go 7-5. I mean, think about Florida last year. Not that they were any good, but they go 6-6 and they get beat by Oregon State like 30-3 in the bowl game, and nobody feels good about that.
Out of there.
I'm glad you said that because I'm not sure that he might not lose his job at the end of this year. Because look at who they finished with. They lose to Arkansas. They got pounded against Georgia in Jacksonville the week before. They finished with LSU, Missouri, and Florida State. 2 of those games on the road. Tell me where they're going to win.
It was a huge game for them. I mean, this was to get bowl eligible, and if they don't, if they had beaten Arkansas, they would have guaranteed finishing at least match what they did last year. I don't think they'll get. I think they'll decline this year, which, like you said, like at the end of the year, people remember how you finished. And to finish like that with a loss to Arkansas, that's a blemish. And also on that same note, I think Arkansas needs, like, talking about how you need to finish. I do think they need to, beating Mizzou would be huge because that'll end people on a really bad note.
And you'll get into a bowl game that you probably have a chance to win because, I mean, I think right now the 2 bowl options are the Birmingham Bowl and the Gasparilla Bowl. Yeah. You know where the Gasparilla Bowl is?
I don't want to know.
Clue.
El Dorado?
The Murphy USA Bowl.
It's actually in St. Petersburg.
Oh.
Not a terrible draw.
No. Yeah, no.
Just right down the road.
No, it's not a good opponent, but it's not a terrible from a weather.
Well, we were at SEC Basketball Media Day saying, are we going to come back to Birmingham here in a couple weeks? But no, I think that like you said, like people remember how you finish, and the way that the series has been going with Missouri, to go 5-7 and that be your last loss and you not be bowl eligible, people will be really upset over the offseason. But honestly, it's like if you go 5-7 and you lose to Auburn and it's just a much better situation if Mizzou is one of those wins.
Hey, let's talk about Auburn real quick. They are 5-4. They're kind of in a similar situation to Florida last week in that they can get bowl eligible if they win this weekend in Fayetteville. They're hot in relative to the teams that they played. They beat up on Mississippi State, then they beat up on Vanderbilt. I think they won those 2 games by combined 30 points. Mm-hmm. Their defense played really well against Vanderbilt. Again, not a real high bar because Vanderbilt, from an efficiency standpoint, is only better than Mississippi State in the SEC. But I think momentum does have a little bit of an impact here in that Auburn has won its last 2 games, starting to get some confidence under a first-year coach who we know is very good in Hugh Freeze, who, by the way, is bringing his 3rd different team to Fayetteville. I can't think of another coach who's brought 3 different teams to Fayetteville. I
hadn't even thought about that.
Bob Holt and I were talking about that this morning. We kind of went through several minutes of talking, well, what about, no, he didn't. Can't remember somebody who brought 3 teams to Fayetteville. I'm not saying that it hasn't happened, but I just don't remember it happening. But that, as a side, Auburn, they've got a little bit of momentum. They're coming in. I think Arkansas offensively, if they perform the way that they did against Florida last week, is way better than either of the last 2 offenses that Auburn has seen.
The one thing, and I'll just 1 second. I think Arkansas's offense, I think a lot of how they finish down the stretch depends on the availability of some guys that got banged up over the weekend. Like Andrew Armstrong, Sam said on Monday that he thinks he's going to be okay, but we saw him bang his head on the ground, and we saw the fencing motion right with his hands after he hit the ground. That's scary, man. And we don't know if he practiced yesterday. Don't know if he's going to practice today. Think he's going to be fine. But he is so valuable because he's got more catches and more receiving yards and as many touchdown catches as numbers 2 and 3 receiving wise on the team. Mm-hmm. And I think either number 2 or number 3 is Luke Haslett. He's not playing. So it's really important that
Ty Washington.
Have him available. Ty Washington was really good. He'd put up like 11 for 170 and a couple scores all in the last 4 weeks, and now you don't have him. And now Sam's talking about a potential scout team guy getting some run at tight end. Like that's not a great look for your tight end room at this point. And then you could be counting on Tykees Crawford at right tackle with Kudus.
Am I crazy to think the tackles look better after Kudus and Chambly went out? I thought that the combination of Crawford and Manuel looked better.
Manuel's your guy at left tackle. Like
I think we've all known that Manuel's your guy at left tackle,
healthy.
But it's all about being healthy.
Yeah.
And there's like 3 different injuries that he's gone through this year that have kept him from practicing, kept him out of games. I mean, it's been a terrible run of bad luck for him.
You get your thought off. I'll quit interrupting you.
Oh, no, you're good. I was just going to say that I think that talking about momentum going to this game, like Auburn couldn't have asked for a better like stretch, like as far as they got They started with Mississippi State, then Vanderbilt, Arkansas, and then I think they got like New Mexico State next week. That's a potential 4-game win streak for them. Arkansas's honestly, you look at it, and you're probably Auburn fans probably looking at that stretch saying, like, if you just look at Arkansas scores and against some of the teams they played, that's the one that they're like, okay, that might be our toughest game. I think Arkansas needs to honestly come out really, really hot. Like a fast start would go a long way to just kind of shut that momentum down, like right off the bat. Auburn isn't very good offensively. So I think if Arkansas has success, especially stopping the run game with Hunter.
Yeah, that boy's toting it the last few weeks. He's been really good.
He had a big run at Vanderbilt, I know. So I just think that if Arkansas can come out strong defensively, like I said, like Auburn, the schedule played out for them. Arkansas, aside from losing to Mississippi State, it kind of looked the same way. Mississippi State, it looked the same way. It was kind of those three teams of who's going to try and climb out of the cellar.
Mm-hmm.
Arkansas still has a breath because of that Florida game, but Auburn looks like, I mean, especially if they take this game, they're going to finish 5th. Or no, worse than 5th in the league.
Think it'll be a good crowd Saturday? I think it will be.
I'm kind of torn. I think it will be. I think the basketball crowd will be really closer to actual max capacity because of the football game the next day.
But I think the football game could benefit
game,
from having a basketball game the night before.
I think it'll look a lot like Mississippi State, in my opinion. Like,
yeah,
I think the number you hear will be a lot larger than it looks.
Well, it's a 3 o'clock. No, you're absolutely right about that. That's how it always is because you announce how many tickets you sell and all your tickets don't get sold. I don't know. I think there's a combination of, you got high school playoffs this week. I think it'll bring a lot of people to Northwest Arkansas on Friday night. You might have some people who stay over for that. You've got the basketball game. I think that, there'll be a lot of people who are double dipping. They go to Bud Walton on Friday night. They'll go to the football game on Saturday. I think the 3 o'clock kickoff has a big impact here too. It's a game where people feel kind of comfortable coming in for that game. Maybe where if it was at 11 o'clock, you don't get that kind of crowd. I thought the Mississippi State crowd for a 2 and whatever they were at that time, 2 and 5 team, it was an incredible crowd, and they stayed in it until the very bitter end that afternoon. I think that people haven't. This is going to be a good opportunity this weekend to gauge, have people given up on the football team. I think had they lost in Florida, it would have been a much worse crowd than it would have been a tough.
It would have been a tough scene.
And I don't,
they got to play good at home too, though. Like
FIU and Missouri the last couple of weeks.
Point. Sam mentioned that on Monday too. They've really competed well on the road. Can they do that at home once?
Yeah.
Against a quality.
They have not
team.
looked good at home yet this year. I'm going to include the Kent State game. I mean,
no, you're right.
They've got to play better at home.
People were so upset after the 28-6 win. It was crazy because they just didn't run the ball worth of crap against.
I don't know. I just think there's a combination of there hasn't been that game really for people to celebrate in Fayetteville yet. Mm-hmm. The combination of the afternoon kickoff and just all of it. I think that people haven't quite given up on the team yet, and I think you're going to see that this weekend. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm totally wrong. I think the attendance will be terrible for FIU. I think it'll probably be pretty bad for Missouri, given when the Missouri game falls. If they're 5 and 6, you might get a little bit better of a crowd than you usually get on Black Friday. But this has got the potential maybe for the best atmosphere that we've seen this year.
I just still wonder. Like I agree that there's a chance it could happen, but at the same time, are there is there a chunk of people who will make that effort to get up here for a 3-win team in November? I don't know.
They made the effort to get here for a 2-win team in October, late October.
The weather definitely doesn't hurt either, because this is good of football weather like this week. Is it's been so nice out. I think
just go step over there in front of the green wall and give us a forecast.
Yeah, no, I couldn't know where my county's.
How are we gonna throw it to Ollie with the weather report?
But I mean, we walked out of the basketball game last night and we're just like, this is incredible weather. It's your last chance to really probably. Recent history, those late games in the season at home are really cold. So,
yeah, you wear a couple pair of boot socks in your boots, and your toes still go numb by the end of the game.
I've been there. All right. Well, we appreciate you joining us. We'll be back with another Whole Hog Football Podcast later in the week. On Thursday, we'll look a little bit closer into Auburn. We'll also give our predictions for the weekend. Be sure to listen on Wednesday for the Basketball Podcast in Mid-America. These two will be there. Scottie to talk about the men's basketball game on Monday night. Ethan for Tuesday night's women's game against Louisiana Monroe. And we'll see you next time on the Whole Hog Football Podcast.